Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Lorde. I'm the director of Rain Taxi, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 20th Twin Cities Book Festival. We miss seeing you in person. We especially miss being able to give away copies of our quarterly book review, but we hope you'll pick it up at an independent bookstore or from us directly through our website. Uh, there are, meanwhile, so many other great aspects of this virtual festival to explore. We have 19 of these live author events, and if you've missed any, you can catch the replays. Um, we also have a handful of truly charming recorded presentations in our Minnesota Writers Mashup, and the launch of our latest chapbook, which is Can't Stop, Won't Stop, and features 9 Black poets in the Twin Cities. We also have an exciting exhibit hall filled with scores of publishers, organizations, and authors who are all creating new work and are waiting to share it with you. We know if you poke around there, you'll find so much to love and to inspire. And speaking of inspiring, I am really thrilled to introduce this session featuring a cross-genre conversation that brings together amazing authors who all have incredibly different writing approaches, but who I find so compelling as they each bring in their personal experience into their modes. Pamela Sneed is a poet, professor, and performer. Her work has been widely anthologized, and I've noticed over the past years that every time I've seen some of her writing, I've felt uh, touched, as if by an arrow. It's been amazing. And her latest book offers personal essays and poetry to create a kind of multi-genre memoir. There it is, Funeral Diva from City Lights. Adam Smyer is an attorney, martial artist, and a self-described mediocre bass player, probably not worse than I am. I loved his debut novel, Knucklehead, a couple of years back, and his latest book, You Can Keep That to Yourself, a comprehensive list of what not to say to black people for well-intentioned people of color, is an astonishing work that I simply don't know how to ascribe. I can't wait to hear about it. And Frank B. Wilderson III is making a return appearance at our festival after about, I want to say, 8 or 9 years. Hearing him back then expanded my world by several dimensions. And when you read him, that exact same thing happens. He's an award-winning writer, activist, and critical theorist. He's lived everywhere from Johannesburg to here in the Twin Cities, and he's received many awards, including the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Legacy Award for creative nonfiction. His latest book is the astonishing and again undefinable Afropessimism. To lead us through a discussion of their work is once again our friend Lissa Jones, host of the amazing podcast Black Market Reads, which is produced by the Givens Foundation for African American Literature, one of the great exhibitors in our exhibit hall, so find out more about them there as well. I'm delighted that she can be here to lead this conversation. Let me remind all our viewers that you can buy books by the authors using that handy button at the bottom of the screen. You can ask questions. I know they would love to hear from you. What are your interests? And if you're so moved, you can donate to us. We're a nonprofit. We put on this free festival out of passion, and every dollar we raise this year will help us get started to make another one of these events next year. Thanks again for joining us, and please enjoy this panel. Take it away, Lissa.
Thank you, Eric, so much. And welcome, everybody, Pamela and Frank. And I'm just saying in the order I see it in my screen. Hi, Adam. Welcome. Well, I will admit that Frank and I have been together before on our podcast, Black Market Reads, so he knows how I roll. If it's okay with the three of you, I want to hear from you and not from me. So is it okay if we jump right in?
Let's jump.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I dig it, Pamela. Okay, let's jump with you, Pamela, first. Pamela.
Okay,
Pamela Sneed.
okay.
I love it. Author of The Funeral Diva, Personal Narrative as Political Struggle is the name of our talk today. Talk to us about how you use your personal narrative in your political struggle, please. Introduce us to the idea of Funeral Diva.
Well, okay, I was thinking about the topic for this panel, and I started thinking about like slave narratives, right? And I feel like and like how critical they were to abolition, right? And so in that regard, I mean, for better or for worse, I feel like particularly women and lesbian, I feel like we're still like making contemporary slave narratives. You know what I mean? And so that's really the genre, right? And so I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to separate the personal from the political, you know. But I feel like it's critical to show the personal, you know, because like I'm teaching a human rights course, and one of the things that continuously comes up is invisibility. Invisibility. I mean, Ralph Ellison's, you know, Invisible Man is on there, right? And so we need like, you know, I mean, history has these big topics, right? You know, so it's just sort of like and this struggle or whatever, but people are really invisible in that, right? The individual, what the actual experience is. Like one of the first books that I ever wrote was called Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery. And I wanted to tell, and it's sort of like a riff on Harriet Tubman, right? And I wanted to tell her story because history basically is very action oriented. You know, he went in, he slayed, he conquered, you know what I mean? But no one has any emotional life. You know, it's sort of like no one is like a real person, right? So I wanted to envision, you know, who Harriet Tubman really was. I mean, she was like definitely addicted to John Tubman, the man who would like, you know, turn her in. You know, what did she feel? You know, what did she experience? Because we need to know that in order to, you know, really see ourselves as heroes, as capable, as empowered, we need to know the real deal. You know what I'm saying? You know, not these big broad strokes, but like you know, the minutia. Like how do we deal with this? Like I've been reading Angela Davis, Women, Race, and Class. And I'm so ashamed it took me so long to read this, right? But I'm reading it, and like it's so joyous because I mean, one, it talks a lot about like slave narratives in terms of women and how women have been excluded, but it also talks about resistance, you know, stories of resistance. And I think we don't get enough of that. You know what I mean? Like we're always, you know, like I was furious about something that happened, you know, during the Black Lives Matters thing, where there's a poster going around, and a young woman was holding it up and saying, you know, we are not our ancestors, we will fuck you up. And I was furious because I was like, why do you think you're here holding that sign? And so there's this image of like this like passivity, but like all throughout Angela Davis's story, where she's talking about all anecdotes about like the slave times and women and women's experiences, she talks about rebellion and resistance. And that's like, and so I feel like the personal voice, I mean, I come in the tradition of like Audre Lorde, you know, I come in the tradition of Morrison, you know, so all of these people, and they knew how to use the personal as a political. That's what I say.
Thank you, Pamela. I think about Audre Lorde. When I dare to use my voice in service of my vision, I find that I'm no longer afraid. Audre
Amen.
lives.
All
Amen.
right. I'll
All
say
right.
it.
Frank B. Wilderson, Afropessimism. What? He said, bump the whole thing, get rid of all of it, and rebuild. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Talk to us about your personal narrative as political struggle.
Well, I think that, thank you, Lissa. It's great to be back with you again. What was that? I don't, our radio podcast came out on October 6th. I don't remember when we actually recorded it, but that was wonderful. And Pamela, it's wonderful to meet you for the first time. And Adam, my man, we got history. I'm getting so old. Adam and I were at a writers, a small group of core Black writers who would meet in Oakland, San Francisco, and Berkeley. But I want to say it was 2010. You might remember what it was. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, close enough.
Before I moved down south. So anyway, I'll try to be brief. Lissa. The direct answer to your question is that when I was there, as people who read the book will see, or both my memoirs will see that there was a really transformative point in my life when my mother was working on her PhD, and I was looking at what it means to be a writer, and seeing her process, which is something that I didn't see. My father also has a PhD in the book psychologist. I actually did not see his process because I was about 5 or 6 years old when he finished. So I was about 12 to 14 when she was finishing. I thought it was a very fascinating process, how you move from an idea to note cards to a rough draft to manuscript and rewriting. So that's one thing. The other thing was that at the time, I turned 12 in 1968, and that was a really, really major year for me because the year before that, 1967, I had wanted to be a Roman Catholic priest. And as soon as I turned 12, something happened in those 12 months. But what I really wanted to be was a looter, right? And so I became more under the sway of influence of people in the world of the university and revolutionary activity in the streets at that early age. And one of the things that in 1969, 70, I had opportunity to visit Panthers when I was 13 and 14 in Chicago and in Berkeley when my parents were doing their research on sabbatical. And there's a phrase that kept coming up in these after-school type classes and these pamphlets and books that they would give you. This phrase was heighten the contradictions, heighten the contradictions. And so my life was just an ensemble of contradictions because I know there's so many people that, I was at Wayne Taxi years ago, and it was right a few blocks from where I grew up in Quinwood. And that was a heightened contradiction experience, growing up in the whitest neighborhood on the western side of Minneapolis, in a place like Blackness. But also the contradiction was that you were made feel as though you were so lucky because you had these opportunities. And I've tried to unburden myself over the years of a kind of reformist attitude to the United States and simply take a revolutionary stance, which is to say that the United States has no ethical basis for its existence. Diachronically, meaning historically, there's no ethical foundation for its existence. And then synchronically, which is to say right now as a Polaroid snapshot, the distribution of power is not ethical. And rather than work through the question, which so many of us have to ask ourselves, because we just have to live day to day, this is a question, how do I live my Black life day to day in this unethical world? I'm not down on people who have to ask themselves that, but that is not my question. My question is, how do I undo this metropolitan America completely? How do I lay tracks that will help in the analysis of that? That's on my theoretical writing, which is my second book. And this book brings both of them together, in which I'm looking at the actual episodes in my own life for the symptoms. It's called a symptomatic read of American anti-Blackness in the symptoms of my own life, okay, to see how those two things come together. Finally, in 1980, as you can see in the book, the chapter called Hattie McDaniel Was Dead, I was kicked out of Dartmouth College for 2 years with 3 classes left to go for political activity. This is a time when the FBI was vamping on me. I did not know it. I was living over on 24th and Irvine, over by the lake, and the government broke into my apartment and photographed all my papers, and I actually almost apprehended the people. It was a very tumultuous time in my life, plus I'd been kicked out of school. And when I got back to school to finish those 3 classes, I was introduced to Ishmael Reed, who many people know, the great Black novelist. And one of the things that he told me, which was very interesting, because I've been taking classes at the Loft 78 and 79 in Minneapolis. And I wrote a speculative story, which was about something that I witnessed at an age that I could not really process, which was my father's graduation with his PhD in about 1958-59 in Michigan. And the slice of that story was an imaginative story of my grandfather, who was a political activist working for organizing the first chapter of the NAACP in his parish. I put those two stories together. Initially, we published that. It was my first published story. I didn't, and I said to him, is it narcissistic? And to constantly write about oneself. And he gave me this line. He said, Philip Roth, the Jewish novelist, has been writing about his penis for the past 30 years.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Well, that's something.
Whatever you have to say about yourself is fine. And finally, to end my little point, fast forward, that was 1984-ish that he published that story, and I still have it, my first published short story about an episode in Michigan. Fast forward to 1989, I'm writing a novel. I'm doing a master's in fine arts in fiction writing in the art school at Columbia. I'm working on a novel in the third person. It comes time to workshop my piece. I don't have it ready. So one night, I simply wrote a story of a very traumatic incident that happened when I was at Kenwood School in grade school in third grade, which is in my first book. And I brought it to class. It was nonfiction, and you cannot write fiction nonfiction in the fiction, if you're working on the fiction degree. So I lied and said, this is a short story, which the room just exploded with the most genuine, empathetic reaction to the writing and the story. And there was a white woman who was about 15 years older than me, who had been a revolutionary back in the day, and she made a film who many people know of the murder of Fred Hampton, the Black Panther. And as we were walking down Broadway to 116th Street, she said, that didn't sound like fiction, number one. And number two, that's the real deal. That's what you need to be working on. So I then went to South Africa, worked at the ANC for 5 or 6 years, kept a journal. I got there on a grant to write a novel. The journal turned out to be more powerful than the fiction I was writing. And
Indeed.
The first book. So that's it. That's it.
That's a lot. That's
Wow.
a lot. This is a heavy panel. Now, Dr. Joseph White, thank you so much, Frank Wilderson III. I appreciate you. And thank you. Dr. Joseph White founded the field of Black psychology in Ebony magazine in 1970 when he wrote the article Toward a Black Psychology. He also identified 7 resiliencies of Black folk, one of which was gallows humor, the ability to laugh inside of the multiple pandemics that are the reality of living while Black. Adam, welcome to this podcast. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank
and
you.
Shout out to Incognito, if that's what you were alluding to, because it blew my mind. Yeah.
Well, I'm also alluding to this, actually.
Oh, yes. No, I was just
yes.
picking up where Frank left off, because that was my introduction to Frank. And yeah, I love South Africa now too. So sitting here listening to you guys, I had a thought that I think holds, and I guess my approach is that my books are a support group for Black people. You know, I'm not so much focused on dismantling the system as I am just enduring. It's like getting through. I think the greatest miracle is that we're still here, and we're, relatively speaking, kind of kicking ass. Somebody asked me at the beginning of the pandemic, and this is Minneapolis I'm talking to, and when things had jumped off, whether I thought this time things were going to really change. And you live through the cycle enough times and you take on sort of a cynical view. But my conclusion was that in the next 4 years, probably not. Next 400 years, definitely. Because look at 400 years ago, right? So for me, the miracle is just us. We are walking miracles. And it turns out that what my writing is intended to do is just give the reader that little bit of connection to get through the day, because part of what is done to us, part of the treatment, is isolation, right? So I dig as deep as I can to get these real moments, put them out there in a way that people can appreciate, and I'm pleased with the result when it happens. One of the best things that has happened in my career was the launch for Knucklehead, my first book. It was a novel set in the 90s, and at some point, the conversation went out into the audience. There's a scene in Knucklehead that describes the night the LAPD were acquitted for beating that man senseless for no reason. And the chapter specifically had to do with the mood of my workplace at the moment that the verdicts were announced, and then contrasted with the mood of the place the next morning after the riots. To wit, I felt a little better. Most of my coworkers did not. And I remember at the launch of the event, Black people all through the audience kind of piping in where they were, that night and the next day, and how that was and how weird people were. And I kind of looked around and I was thinking, okay, this turns out to be what I was going for, So the next book, the new book, is kind of much more that. It is a satire. It is a parody anti-racism handbook, but really it just started off as me venting. So if you didn't catch it from the title, the conceit of the book is that it is a small book that white people can carry around on them, and when they see one of us coming and they have a bright idea what to say to us, they can use the handy alphabetized tab and open it up to, look, I just got to H, honky. Only honkies say honky, right? So that's the sort of thing that is ostensibly offered to them. Obviously, it's for us. Each entry is I think Kirk has called it a balm for these microaggressions that we encounter each day. My goal once the book got going was, my vision was this book on, every Black desk in America, because just knowing it's there, I know I've benefited from having collected and polished my retorts to these toxic things that people have given themselves permission to say to us every day. And that's my way of fighting back.
Well, I have to admit, it is fantastic, because it was like salve for the soul. It really was like, oh my, this happens to other people all the time who look like me, and they understand, I don't have to go through this again. And in some cases, it well equipped me to say, oh, okay, well, I have certain things I could say in return, So I want to say thank you. Thank you. All of you, in one way or another, have talked about the theme that Black people live in, this place between visibility and invisibility. If it's good, we're hyper invisible. And if it's bad, for penalty or a punishment, we are hyper visible at the same time. Any one of you can pick this up in terms of theme. What has been your experience? And in your writing, how does this theme of visibility and invisibility show up?
Well, I mean, it comes up in a lot of different ways, because one, there's not a lot of literature that deals with like Black, lesbian, like sort of like working class experience, right? So in a certain way, we're still writing ourselves into existence in terms of like literature, right? So there's that. And again, like I go back to Morrison, because like early on, she said, write the books that you want to read. Write what you want to read. And basically I had gone through a really bad breakup, and I just there was nothing I could pull off a shelf that could help me. You know what I mean? And that's when I decided to write Imagine Being More Afraid of Freedom Than Slavery, right? And it's like how you get caught in these abusive, cycles, how we've never been trained to be free. You know what I mean? Everybody's like, well, why don't you leave? But it's like, if you don't know anything else, where are you going exactly, right? And then also, I mean, that's the slavery that has succeeded, is that it's so mental, that basically we don't need any chains. You know what I mean? It's so internalized. We've internalized that system. So anyway, I mean, I think I'm always writing to kind of give feelings, experiences, identity, to give it a name, to give it a voice, and always I think people are like rather shocked. I mean, you talked about it at the beginning, not as shocked, but like the amount of vulnerability that I'll use. Like I'm trying to like kind of like, I just like open it up and say things that I feel like need to be said. I don't know, but I it's not really, I don't have an agenda when I write. I mean, my only, thing that I'm going for is to tell my truth, to speak my truth, and hopefully finding a community in that, you know. So.
It reminds me, in the way you write in your book, the way that Audre Lorde and James Baldwin wrote about the Black, gay, and lesbian community. They wrote that community into existence. And you're
Right.
saying that this is the legacy that you're picking up as well, continuing
Right.
to write for us and testify and signify to our existence.
Right. And then also, Funeral Diva, the title piece, is about coming of age during the AIDS era. And now people are starting to kind of like look back on that time. There's like literature that's coming up. But the bottom line is that it's all white men who are sort of helming that, right? Mm-hmm. So that, and that they talk about like maybe one, Black gay person, the token. But I'm saying a comprehensive, history has never been written, has never been documented, right? And so you had all these, Black gays and lesbians who converged upon New York City, brought on by Baldwin and Audre Lorde, and like they were our parents, and so they made us possible. So here we go, and then like everyone's like, decimated within the first couple of years. All these writers and performers decimated by AIDS and cancer, right? So in that regard, that history has not been told, and so part of like my promise to myself and to my community is to tell that story. And then I also feel like, I've been to Ghana, I've been to the slave forts, I've been to South Africa, I've been to Robben Island, and it is about the miracle that we've survived and also how powerful we are. Do you know what I mean? But also, because no one, it's superhuman to survive what has been, sort of like enacted against us, right? But that's the other thing too. People are like, oh, well, I don't want to hear any more slave stories. And it's like, well, believe me, you haven't. You haven't heard, because there were hundreds and, millions of us that came through, and you got like, in America, you had roots as the primary story, right? One family,
There you go.
So you have never heard it. It's never been told, right? And so my promise is to tell that story for my ancestors, for my queer ancestors,
Amir Baraka said there is a trail of human bones, black ivory, laying at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. That's what we need to pay attention to. We cannot be who we are without looking back to our ancestors and what we've been through, and recognize our history neither started in enslavement nor did it end there. And that is partly the miracle. Adam, you are digging it. Go ahead. And Frank, I love your smile, so I'm gonna come to you in a minute. Adam, what's up?
I don't really think of it these days so much in terms of visibility or invisibility, but I think I write middle-class educated Black people because I write what I know. And it's different now. Our golden age began and possibly ended when one of us got himself elected president. But before that, there was a confusion that I was used to encountering as I moved through the world. And even well-intentioned people seem to be putting out a vibe of, how did you get through? Well, we thought we got all of you. And somewhere behind me is Emperor of Ocean Park. Somewhere behind me is Ernest Gaines's work. And that was the stuff that spoke to me. It all speaks to me, but there's something special about the people who are placed in exactly the place I am, because we're not as few as they would like to think. And I feel like my whole life, now it's in the form of writing these books, but my whole life I've been putting out this signal to my people who don't fit a type. I wrote in an essay a while ago that, when I was growing up in the 80s, there were 6 kind of Black people and me. And that's, I've been sending out the signal for as long as I can remember, and I've been getting a lot of signals back, and that's amazing.
Well, I love it. Dr. King said, if we are not maladjusted to what's happening right now, something is absolutely incredibly wrong with us. Frank, you are smiling, and that makes me smile. What's on your mind?
Well, I've just been listening to, I'm very embarrassed because I've been so engrossed in what Pamela and Adam have said, and I don't want to go off on a tangent. I kind of forgot your original question because I was just
Well, there's no reason to be embarrassed, Dr. Wilderson. You don't have to be embarrassed at all. I'm caught up in their narrative too. Invisibility, invisibility. How do they play into your work?
Well, you see, I have two projects going on. One is a project of what's called a macro critique of the foundation of critical theory. So that's my hat from my PhD in critical theory and the work that I do. And so basically what Afropessimism started, we believe the people who are the intellectuals who are writing about through the network and the discourse of Afropessimism, that's not a discovery, that the first African in 625 AD, when the Arabs, the Chinese, the Iraqis, the Iranians, the East Indians vamped on East Africa, understood that the creation of civilization across the waters was inextricably bound to the destruction of African cosmology, African polity. And so one of the things that the invisibility that you talk about, I won't go too deep into a 10-week lecture, there are foundational discourses like psychoanalysis and Marxism, which are foundational to the books that write about how the oppressed suffer in the world. And so what I have done with the help of colleagues at Columbia, UC Berkeley, here, and in other places of the world, is to critique the assumptive logic of highly abstract critical theory, to say not that it's wrong, but to say that it cannot explain the singularity of Black suffering. So that's a kind of macro invisibility that the project of Afropessimism as a disciplinary intervention that is causing waves throughout the academy around the world is making. But it's also the kind of thing that doesn't translate to someone who doesn't have a PhD. Because if you haven't studied continental theory, if you haven't studied Lacan and Freud, if you've only known the rudiments of Marxism and haven't read the original text, then this is going to sound like highly abstract, not so concrete material. And that's one of my hats. That's where my critical articles are. That's what my second book is about. But my other hat is as an artist. And so what I'm trying to do is I see my work as a kind of diptych, in a sense, like the other panel of an art piece with Pamela and Adam, in that I am, the invisibility that I'm trying to bring out is the thing that we don't talk about enough, which is to say we have so many books and narratives and how-tos about our plans, and we haven't given ourselves permission to be intellectuals of our pain. In fact, we try to tell ourselves to get over it, or we give our children coping strategies, which are all fine. I have a 33-year-old daughter, and that's what I try to do for her, my daughter. But that's not okay with respect to understanding the singularity of what does it mean to exist as a suffering being in a paradigm. In other words, there has not, up until Afropessimism, there has not been enough work on the way structural violence, which is very different than performative violence, I won't go all into that, where paradigmatic violence works on the African diaspora in a way that is different than it works on the working class. And part of the reason for that is that the left crowds us out. So that's one form of invisibility that I work on. The other is, and I'll make it 30 seconds here, is I tell students in writing workshops to stand in the middle of the room, pour gasoline on themselves and light a match. In other words, to put as much vulnerability, and this is a word that gets up from Pamela, on the page as possible. David Murrah, the sensei poet in Minneapolis, when I worked with him and took classes with him, said, during the opening drafts, write down the stories, the vignettes, the things about yourself and the relationships to others that you would want no one else in the world to read. Get that out. He didn't say publish it. He said get it out so you can look at it, so that you're not censoring yourself as you write, because we exist in a state of madness, which we are told is a state of sanity. And that's what I want to really, I want my work to be volcanic in that way, to express on the page but I would never want anyone to know about me.
Thank you, Frank. That's scary. Pamela, if we had 2 minutes, which we actually do, for you
Oh,
to, yeah, for you to lay down what you want people to know, like Dr. Wilderson just laid down what he wanted people to know, what would it be?
oh my gosh. Oh shoot. That's way too hard.
I know, but you're so brilliant. I know you could do
Um,
it.
well, oh no, I wanted to pick up on something that Frank said because one, I just wrote this critique. Like I also read pop culture, in my book, right. So I'm always looking at film. I'm always dissecting film. And I looked at I wrote about Queen and Slim. And at first I really hated it. It's not in the book, but it's a new piece that I did. And it really bothered me because it was like, okay, you're black fugitives, and they're just not hurrying up. You know what I mean? They never play the circumstance. They're just moseying around. She's got on high heels. It's just not working. But then, I watched it over and over now that it's on HBO. And I think that the love story works because we don't see enough black love, right? But there was something interesting that really bothered me in that, like everyone, all the black people are reactionary. Like, no one ever stops to think as if and that's how we're depicted, in the media. That's how we're depicted everywhere. Is that we're just, we are just like lighting matches. We are just like running around, reacting to everything. And it's not like we're like sort of like, our black intellectual tradition is completely like obliterated. I mean,
Erased.
we're people of thinkers. You know what I mean? We're thinkers and we act, right? And so all of our intellectual prowess has been like just completely in the depictions of us, they just, it's just kind of like we're just going around and we don't know what we're doing. We're
We're
just
bumbling without plan.
right, and it's just like we're the architects of freedom, that basically, I mean, every, population in the world has followed us. So please, you know what I mean? But always like, and even black people are doing that, like really dismissing our intellectual traditions and our capability. I mean, we're from brilliant thinkers, right?
And we need
So
to remember that.
yeah, so I mean that's something that has bothered me and that I'm writing about now, and I feel part of that. But basically, I guess I want to write a manual about like survival, that we can survive and that people feel empowered, that I feel empowered getting my stories out and healing, and that people can pick up and see themselves reflected in some way and feel like they can continue.
Bless
And
you, Pamela.
people say that they feel like they want to be activists after they read me. So it's like, okay, hallelujah. That's what I want to do.
Then it's righteous. Adam
Okay.
Smyer, take us home. You can keep it to yourself. It reminded me of Tony. I can't keep it to myself. But in your case, we want them to keep it to themselves. What would you say, Adam?
Well, yeah, I would encourage them to keep it to themselves. It's funny because I'm through the looking glass right now because I wrote satire, not realizing that in this world most people take satire at face value. I thought it would be funny to write a parody anti-racism handbook that actually was a helpful anti-racism handbook, and it is being largely received as such. But that was not my intention, because why are we all still acting like it even matters what people say? We're in the middle of something that it's going to take us years to get our minds around, and people still want to dialogue. And if watching a man get murdered for 9 minutes is what it took to let you realize that something was wrong, then you still don't know something is wrong.
Adam Smyer said it. If you didn't know. Pamela Sneed, funeral diva. Frank B. Wilderson III, writing about Afropessimism, miss him with all of it. And Adam Smyer, teaching us coping mechanisms for keep it to yourself. This has been a fantastic, phenomenal experience. I hope you three have had as wonderful experience as you have given us. And to the listening audience, here they are in their Black, beautiful brilliance. And I'm delighted to be your host. Thank you, Rain Taxi. Check out the exhibitors, and most importantly, buy their books. Love of Black people is a verb, you dig? That's right. Afropessimism, funeral diva, and you can keep that to yourself. See you, beauties. Take care and be safe.
Bye.
Much
Nice
love.
talking to you.
It's a pleasure. The
Thank you.
pleasure's all mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.